Snow had packed itself into every seam of County Road 6 by the time Caleb Rowan heard the sound. It was not a cry at first. It was smaller than that, almost swallowed by the wind, rushing through the black spruce and rattling the chain on the Bayfield fire station door. Caleb had been standing beside engine Tuve, Kep Ite, hat coffee cooling when the dispatcher called about water backing up near the culvert outside Harker's Bend. No one mentioned an animal. They only said the road was icing over, and a plow driver had seen movement beneath the mouth of the drainage pipe. Caleb set the coffee down without tasting it. At 46, he moved with the steadiness of a man who had learned not to waste motion in bad weather. He zipped his turnout jacket, tugged his wool cap low, and took the small rescue kit from the wall. Inside were tape, towels, gloves, a flashlight, wire cutters, and a folded blue blanket. After losing Anna, he had stopped trusting ordinary days. The station smelled of diesel, wet rubber, and the cinnamon gum Eli Mercer chewed. Eli climbed in while Caleb started the rescue truck, and the headlights opened 2 pale tunnels through the snow. "Probably a raccoon," Eli said. "Maybe," Caleb answered. He hoped it was. Raccoons made noise. Whatever he had heard under the wind had sounded like something trying hard not to be found. If this quiet rescue settles in the heart, liking or subscribing would help keep these stories alive, and the comments could hold where you are watching from, and the name of an animal that once marked your life. At Harker S. Bend, the plow truck waited with lights turning. Ron Harker stood near the ditch with his collar up and his beard full of ice. "It's down there," Ron called. Mort thought it was a branch. Then it moved. Caleb took the flashlight and walked toward the culvert. Snow had drifted high against the road bank, leaving only a low black half-moon where water should have run. Thin trickles whispered underneath, making a hollow glassy sound. Then he heard it again. A rough, breathy rasp. Not loud, not pleading, more like a warning given by a creature with very little strength left to spend. Caleb crouched, his knees pressing into snow that soaked through his pants. He angled the flashlight into the pipe. At first he saw only ice, bent weeds, and runoff sliding over stones. Then the beam touched fur. The animal was wedged about 8 feet in, half-shadowed behind a rim of frozen slush, long legs tucked tight, spotted coat clumped with snow, short tail pressed against the metal curve, one ear torn at the tip. One pale whisker cut a thin line through the darkness beside her muzzle. Her eyes caught the light and burned gold. Eli sucked in a breath behind him. Bobcat. Caleb had seen bobcats in trail camera pictures, and once crossing a logging road at dawn, like a secret the forest had decided to keep. But this one was no passing shadow. She was trapped, too weak to climb over the ice shelf behind her, and too frightened to move toward the men. She opened her mouth. No sound came at first. Then came that low rasp again, and one front paw shifted. Her toes spread. Even exhausted, she showed the curved tips of her claws. "That's all right," Caleb murmured. "You don't have to like us." The bobcat blinked once, slow and hard, as if the light insulted her. Eli gave a nervous laugh. "She definitely does tea." That small, shaky sound warmed the frozen edge of the moment. Ron backed away to fetch a shovel without being asked. Eli held the flashlight exactly where Caleb needed it, though his hand trembled. Caleb reached into the rescue kit and pulled out the blue blanket. the one Anna had once used for injured barn kittens. For a second, his thumb rested on its frayed corner. He had not meant to think of Anna there, beside a ditch in a snowstorm, with a wild bobcat watching him like he was another danger the night had invented. But grief had always been like winter water. It found its way through the smallest openings. Caleb lay flat near the culvert mouth. The metal breathed cold against his face. It smelled of rust, mud, and old leaves sealed under ice. He could hear the bobcatess breathing, shallow but fierce. Every few seconds her whiskers twitched. Her ears flattened, lifted, flattened again. She measured distance the way wild things did, not in feet, but in chances. "We need Mara," he said quietly. Eli nodded and reached for the radio. Mara Voss, the county wildlife ranger, knew injured wildcats better than anyone in Bayfield County. Caleb knew better than to drag a terrified bobcat out with only courage. Love without knowledge could become harm. He had learned that from Anna, too. While they waited, Ron blocked the wind with the plow truck. Eli spread sand on the road. Caleb warmed a towel inside his coat, then placed it near the culvert opening. Not close enough to threaten her, just close enough to soften the air. The bobcat watched every movement. Once, when Caleb shifted too quickly, she struck the ice with one paw. The sound cracked through the pipe, sharp as a snapped twig. Then she pulled the paw back and tucked it beneath her chest, pretending she had meant to do exactly that. Eli whispered, "She's got attitude." Caleb's mouth almost smiled. "Good. Attitude keeps you alive." Ron cleared snow from the ditch with exaggerated politeness. Eli offered Caleb the thermos twice and apologized both times until Caleb told him, "You're redoing fine." The young man's shoulders dropped as if he had been waiting all winter for those words. The bobcat did not soften. Not then. But after several minutes, she lowered her chin onto her paws. Her amber eyes stayed open. Her torn ear flicked when the radio crackled. Her pale whisker trembled each time the wind changed. Caleb stayed where she could see him. He did not reach. He did not promise what he could not keep. When Mara's headlights finally appeared through the snowfall, Caleb did not stand right away. The bobcat's eyes had begun to close. "Stay with us," he whispered. At the sound of his voice, her one torn ear lifted. Only a little. But Caleb saw it. And that tiny movement felt less like hope arriving than hope deciding, carefully, whether it could trust him. Mara Voss stepped from her county truck, Vekepite hat, her hood up, and a canvas carrier in one hand, and the sight of her crossing the ditch through the snow seemed to pull Caleb backward in time. Not far, just enough. He remembered other winter nights at Bayfield Station, when the whole building held its breath between calls. The old brick firehouse sat 2 streets from Lake Superior, where wind came off the water with a clean, bitter smell, and pressed frost against every window. Most nights, Caleb was the one who stayed awake after the younger firefighters slept. He checked the chains on the bay doors. He refilled the coffee urn. He swept salt from the entry. Then he sat at the scarred kitchen table, with Anna's chipped white mug between his hands, even though he rarely drank from it anymore. The mug had a faded loon painted on one side. Anna had bought it at a church rummage sale because she said the bird looked insulted by the price tag. For years, that had been enough to make him laugh. After she died, he kept the mug on the table, because moving it felt too close to admitting the kitchen chair across from him would stay empty. Some mornings Eli found it there and set his own cereal bowl carefully beside it, as if the mug were another member of the crew. Caleb never thanked him for that. He only made sure Eli's boots were dry before the next call. Before grief quieted him, Caleb had been known around town as the firefighter who could fix nearly anything with wire, patience, and a muttered apology. He repaired stuck hydrant caps, broken snowblower cords, porch steps that complained under elderly feet, and the loose latch on the firehouse pantry. Anna had been the one with the gentle hands. On summer evenings, she fed orphan squirrels via capite hat tiny syringes for the licensed rehab center outside Duluth. She moved turtles from roads. She wrote dates on cardboard boxes in neat blue ink. Caleb had watched her work with a patience that made his own strength feel clumsy. She never rushed frightened creatures. She would sit on the mudroom floor, while some trembling thing decided whether the world had ended or merely changed shape. When the cancer came, Caleb spent months trying to be useful in all the ways he understood. He shoveled. He cooked soups too thick to be called soup. He drove through sleet to bring home the lemon candies she could still taste. He read the newspaper aloud until she smiled and told him not to make the obituaries sound like dispatch reports. But he could not fix what mattered. That failure had moved into him quietly. It did not make him bitter. It made him careful. He stopped promising outcomes. He stopped saying everything would be all right. On calls, he became calm, almost to the point of silence, the kind of man people trusted because he did not spend comfort like loose change. Still, there were signs of the man he had been. He left wrapped muffins in the engine bay before dawn. He shoveled the station steps in a path just wide enough for Mrs. Bendel's old terrier to inspect, though the dog had never approved of him. He kept peppermint sticks in the office for children on fire safety tours. The whole town knew Caleb Rowan would come when called. What they did not know was how often he wondered who came for the ones who made no call at all. That was why, on that night at Harker's Bend, he could not look away from the Bobcat in the Culvert. She had no language the dispatcher could understand. She had no warm kitchen waiting with a chair pulled out. She had only the narrow pipe, the cold runoff touching her belly, and the fierce, exhausted pride in her eyes. Mara crouched beside him without speaking at first. Her braid had frozen into a dark rope over one shoulder. She smelled faintly of pine smoke and veterinary disinfectant, a combination Caleb had learned to associate with long nights and small chances. Juvenile female, Mara said after a moment. Not a kitten. Not full grown. The Bobcat's torn ear flattened at Mara's voice. Her body compressed lower, every muscle making itself smaller and more dangerous at the same time. One paw scraped the ice in a slow, deliberate pull. Not an attack yet, but a sentence written plainly enough. Stay back. Mara nodded, as if the Bobcat had spoken politely. She's telling us she still has choices, Mara murmured. Caleb liked that about Mara. She never called fear meanness. Behind them, Eli stood too still, holding the flashlight like a candle in church. Ron Harker had brought an old horse blanket from his plow cab and laid it across the snow for the equipment. When the wind lifted one corner, Ron stepped on it and whispered, "No sense freezing the good tools," and Eli snorted despite himself. Caleb's glove brushed the blue blanket again. He remembered Anna folding it on the mudroom bench, saying that blue calmed people more than animals. But sometimes people were the ones who needed calming. He almost heard her voice in the hush under the road. "Can we get her out without hurting her?" Eli asked. Mara did not answer too quickly. She studied the angle of the pipe, the shelf of ice, the thin stream running under the Bobcat's flank. The animal watched Mara back, pupils wide. whiskers forward, breath-making brief fog that vanished. "We can give her away," Mara said. "She'll decide whether to take it." Caleb lowered his head until his cheek nearly touched the frozen rim of the culvert. He had spent years entering burning houses, overturned cars, flooded basements, and rooms where people waited for help. They kept. Ita had eyes too tired to hope, but this felt different. This wild creature had not asked him for anything. She might never thank him. She might strike him if he got close enough. If she survived, the best ending would be that she vanished into the spruce and never looked back. That thought hurt and comforted him at the same time. He whispered, "That's fair." Inside the pipe, the bobcat's pale whisker trembled. Her amber eyes narrowed. Not soft, not trusting, but present. Caleb stayed still and understood, with a quiet ache, that he was not there to be loved by her. He was there because she was alive. And on certain winter nights, that was reason enough. Mara opened the canvas carrier and took out a soft snare pole, 2 towels, and a small bottle of warmed broth. The scent changed the air around the culvert. It carried salt, chicken, and the memory of kitchens, and Caleb saw the bobcat's nostrils move before the rest of her admitted interest. She did not lift her head. She only breathed once, sharper than before, and the pale whisker beside her muzzle twitched. "That's the first honest thing she's done," Mara said. Eli, still holding the flashlight, whispered, "Smelling soup." "Considering whether we re-fools," Mara answered. Ron Harker gave a quiet chuckle, then looked embarrassed, as if laughter might be rude to a wildcat in distress. The sound eased something in Caleb's chest. Mara dabbed broth onto a towel and slid it only a few inches into the pipe with the end of the pole. Not toward the bobcat's face. Not close enough to crowd her. Just far enough that the scent could travel over the ice. The bobcat's ears changed first. One flattened. The torn one lifted. Her amber eyes fixed on the towel as if it were a trick she intended to understand before it understood her. Then she made a low growl that trembled through the metal. The culvert made every breath sound trapped. Water ticked beneath the ice in small notes. Snow hissed across the road above them. Caleb's cheek had gone numb where the cold rim touched his skin, but he barely shifted. Mara nodded once. She's pinned by that ridge behind her. We need to break it down without sending shards toward her. Past the bobcat's tucked body, ice had built in a lip where the runoff had frozen and frozen again. It was not a wall exactly, more like a cruel step too slick for weak legs. She had likely tried to climb it until exhaustion made even anger heavy. "Moat can reach the side," Caleb said. "You can reach it," Mara replied. "The question is whether she lets you keep your glove." Eli made a small sound, halfway between a laugh and prayer. Mort vote keeping the glove. Caleb almost smiled. Noted. Ron passed a narrow pry bar. Caleb wrapped the end in cloth so metal would not scrape loudly. He lay on the horse blanket, shoulders angled into the culvert, one arm extended along the wall. The bobcat watched his glove as if it were a separate animal entering her den. When the pry bar touched ice, she struck. Her paw flashed so fast Caleb barely saw it. He only heard claws tap the wrapped metal and felt the warning travel up his arm. Not a wild swing. A measured strike. She had spent her strength carefully, saving enough to say no. Caleb pulled back an inch and stopped. "Fair," he murmured. The Bobcat's eyes narrowed. Under the clumped fur, she looked painfully young, all long legs and hollow flanks. Her torn ear gave her a ragged look, but there was dignity in the way she held herself beneath that road. Caleb thought of Anna in the old mudroom, with flour on her sleeve, telling him that scared creatures did not owe anyone gratitude. They only owed themselves survival. He breathed out. "Take the time," he said. So they did. Mara warmed another towel against her coat. Eli softened the flashlight beam against the pipe's curve instead of stabbing the Bobcat's eyes. Ron stood with his back to the wind. Eli dropped the county radio into the snow and apologized to it. The Bobcat, offended by the sound, blinked both eyes very slowly. "That look was for you," Eli whispered. "Probably deserved," Mara said. The broth towel inched closer. The Bobcat did not move toward it, but after several minutes she stretched her neck just enough to touch the air with her nose. Her whiskers fanned forward. Then, with great suspicion, she gave the towel one quick lick and recoiled, as if she had caught herself believing in something. Caleb felt the moment settle in him. Not trust. Not yet. Only hunger stepping briefly ahead of fear. But hunger meant life was still arguing. Caleb returned to the ice ridge, moving only when the Bobcat's gaze shifted from his glove to the broth towel. He chipped softly, breaking small pieces from the side. Each crack sounded too loud, though the storm swallowed most of it. Twice the Bobcat growled. Once she snapped her teeth at empty air. Each time he froze until she lowered her head again. At last the ridge loosened enough for water to slip through behind her. The Bobcat felt it before the people saw it. Her body tightened. Her back paws pressed against the metal. For a breath, Caleb thought she might bolt deeper into the pipe. Instead, her weakened legs slid. Her front claws scraped for purchase and failed. Mara's voice became very low. "Now, Caleb." He pushed the blue blanket forward, not over her head, but beside her, making a soft wall against the ice. Mara guided from the opening with the snare pole held loose, not choking, only steering. The Bobcat twisted, struck the blanket, and caught it with both front paws. Her claws sank deep into the old fabric. Then Caleb pulled. Not hard. Steady. The Bobcat came toward the light in a rush of wet fur, furious breath, and kicking snow. Mara dropped the towel over her shoulders, just long enough to shield her eyes. Eli stumbled backward, and somehow kept the flashlight pointed down. Ron whispered, "Easy, girl," like he was calming a horse. For one wild second, the Bobcat's face was inches from Caleb's. Amber eyes, torn ear, pale whisker, fear burning bright enough to look like fire. Then she was in the carrier. The door latched, the towel tucked over the top, and the whole ditch fell silent except for everyone breathing. Caleb remained on his knees in the snow. His glove was torn across the thumb, but his hand was safe. The blue blanket lay half inside the culvert, clawed and soaked. Eli looked at Moat Fiat and said softly, "She really hated your blanket." Caleb picked it up care. "No," he said, feeling something tremble beneath his ribs that was not cold. She held on to it. Inside the covered carrier, the Bobcat gave one low growl. Still fierce. Still here. And Caleb understood that the first meeting between them had not been gentle at all. It had been fear, ice, hunger, and a wild creature choosing, for one breath, the painful light over the dark. Mara did not take the Bobcat into the firehouse. That was the first thing Caleb noticed, and later he was grateful for it. The station was warm, bright, full of voices and metal sounds. Carrying her into another kind of confusion would have been easier for the people and harder for her. Instead, Mara directed them to the old maintenance shed behind Bayfield Station, the one Caleb used for chains, hose, flares, and the snowblower that started only after insults. It stood 20 yards from the back door, close enough for care, far enough from the kitchen laughter and engine noise. Its windows were small and high. Its concrete floor held the smell of cold oil, cedar shavings, and winter dust. Eli swept while pretending not to be afraid of the covered carrier. Ron dragged in 2 bales of straw from the plow shed and announced that he was charging the county 1 donut for delivery. Mara gave him a look over her glasses. "Submit your invoice properly," she said. Ron nodded solemnly. Chocolate glazed. Even Caleb breathed a quiet laugh. They set up the recovery pen in the dimmest corner, using a steel kennel panel, plywood sheets, and an old workbench turned on its side to make a sheltered back wall. Mara clipped a heat lamp above one end, not too low, and laid towels over the straw so the Bobcat could choose soft or scratchy ground. Choice mattered. Mara said frightened animals healed better when some corner of the world still belonged to them. Caleb listened closely. He had spent much of his life stepping into places where choice had been taken away. Fire did not ask permission. Ice did not negotiate. Illness had not given Anna a vote. But here, in this shed that smelled like rope and sawdust, there were small decisions they could return to a wild creature. Light or shadow, broth or quiet, distance or retreat. Mara knelt before the covered carrier. No hands through the bars. No reaching. No crowding. She is not a project, Caleb. He looked at her. Mara's voice softened. Mote know you know. Mort am saying it because caring people forget when they get scared. Inside the carrier, the Bobcat shifted. A growl rolled under the towel, low and private, like distant thunder beneath snow. I won't forget, Caleb said. Mara opened the carrier door and backed away. For a long time, nothing happened. The shed roof ticked as snow loosened and slid over the metal edge outside. Somewhere in the bay, a radio murmured, then cut off. Caleb could smell broth warming in a steel bowl on Mara's portable heater. The Bobcat remained hidden under the towel, inside the carrier, only the torn point of one ear visible through a gap. Eli whispered from the doorway, "Maybe she likes it in there." Mara whispered back, "She likes knowing where the walls are." That made sense to Caleb in a way he did not say aloud. At last the towel lifted. One paw appeared first, broad and spotted, toes spreading to test the straw. The claws showed for a moment, then vanished. Her head followed, slow as moonrise. Amber eyes swept the shed, measuring every object, every breath, every weak place in the fence. Her torn ear tilted toward Caleb. The pale whisker shone against her dark cheek. She stepped out, then stopped halfway, back legs still in the carrier, as if unwilling to be fully rescued. No one moved. The Bobcat sniffed the straw and chose the darkest corner. She limped slightly on her left hind leg, just enough that Caleb's jaw tightened. When she passed the broth bowl, she did not drink. She turned her face away in clear insult. Eli mouthed, "Rude." Mara's shoulders shook once with silent laughter. Caleb placed the bowl exactly 3 feet from the fence, where Mara told him, then backed to the taped line. 3 feet for the bowl. 6 feet for the humans. More when she asked for more in the only language she had. The Bobcat watched him go. For the rest of that night, distance became their work. Caleb checked the heat lamp without stepping past the tape. Mara examined the animal only with her eyes unless sedation became necessary. Eli brought clean water and nearly tripped over the broom, catching himself with a dancer-esque flourish that made Ron clap once from outside. Ron left the promised horse blanket folded on a nail and said he did not want it back until it smelled less like Bobcat opinion. The Bobcat ignored them all with tremendous effort. She sat in the shadowed corner, front paws tucked beneath her chest, body upright despite exhaustion. Every few minutes her nose lifted. She sorted the shed smells: men, metal, straw, broth, diesel, old mice behind the wall. Once she turned sharply toward a rustle in the rafters, and Caleb realized she had heard something none of them had. Even half frozen and afraid, she belonged to a sharper world. Near midnight, Mara left instructions taped to the shed door. Small meals. Dim light. No sudden noises. Call if her breathing changed. Keep the latch clipped twice. Let her decide the pace. Caleb stood outside while Mara loaded her truck. Snow had softened to thin flakes that landed on his sleeves and disappeared. The station glowed behind him, yellow windows in a blue-black world. "You should sleep," Mara said. He looked toward the shed. "Moat will." She gave him the kind of look people used when they did not believe a firefighter. "Caleb." He tucked his hands under his arms. Mort met not going in. Mot Luklunk just listened from the office. Mara studied him, then nodded. Listening is allowed. After she drove away, Caleb returned to the station kitchen. Anna S. chipped loon mug sat beside the sink where Eli must have moved it while cleaning. Caleb set it back on the table without thinking, then sat down facing the window that looked toward the shed. For a while there was only wind. Then came a faint scrape from outside. Straw shifting. A bowl nudged an in. Caleb leaned back and closed his eyes. The Bobcat had not trusted him. She had not forgiven the blanket, the carrier, the light, or the strange men who smelled of smoke. But she had moved in the darkness. She had chosen a corner. She had considered the broth. It was not much. It was everything he was allowed to ask for. By morning, the maintenance shed had learned to breathe around her. The heat lamp hummed softly in the corner, throwing a dull red circle over the straw, and frost feathered the inside edges of the high windows where Caleb's breath had warmed the room during his quiet checks. Outside, the plows passed with their heavy, scraping sound. Inside, every smaller sound mattered more. Water tapping from a thawing eave, the faint clink of the fence when the Bobcat shifted, the soft slide of her pads across the towels Mara had laid down. Caleb arrived before sunrise kepite hot broth, clean water, and the torn blue blanket. He stopped at the tape line. The Bobcat was awake. Of course she was. He had begun to suspect she slept only in pieces, stealing scraps of rest between inspections of the world. She sat in the far corner, kept a hat, her body angled sideways, never fully facing him and never fully turning away. Her torn ear pointed toward the door. The other tracked the rafters. Her pale whisker curved against her cheek, like a fine scratch in moonlit glass. The broth bowl from the night before was empty. Caleb noticed without looking directly at it for too long. He had learned. In one night, that triumph could feel like pressure if carried into the room too loudly. "Well," Eli whispered from behind him, "somebody hated it all gone." Caleb kept his face calm, but the warmth of that small sentence reached him. Eli had brought a fresh towel from the station laundry, still warm enough that steam rose when the cold air touched it. On the towel was a faded blue stripe. Mara had returned just after 6, boots dusted, kepite hat, powder snow and hair tucked under a wool cap. She checked the Bobcat's posture through the kennel panel and spoke in a low voice. "Breathing looks better," she said, still favoring the left hind. "We will not push an exam unless she gives us reason." The Bobcat's nose wrinkled at the word exam, or perhaps at Mara's gloves, which smelled faintly of medicine. She opened her mouth just enough to show teeth, then closed it again as if even threats required budgeting. Eli leaned closer to Caleb. "She's economical with hatred." "She's practical," Caleb said. The tiny joke settled gently in the cold shed. Ron Harker appeared at the doorway with a paper bag of breakfast biscuits and asked whether Bobcats preferred sausage, or if that counted as bribery. Mara told him Bobcats preferred everyone to stop discussing their menu in front of them. Ron bowed to the animal through the fence. The Bobcat did not blink. Caleb placed the fresh bowl 3 feet from the fence, exactly where the first had been. Then Mara nodded toward the towel. "Try the blue one," she said. Same distance. No hand lingering. Caleb understood. The towel was not for warmth alone. It was an object that had touched him. The station, the rescue, the frightening night. It smelled of soap, diesel, cotton, and human nearness. If she tolerated it, one tiny piece of the new world became less threatening. He crouched slowly. His knees complained, but he did not let his breath hitch. The Bobcat watched his hands. Not his face. His hands. That seemed wise to him. Hands had done most of the harm in the world and most of the healing, and wild things had every right to study them. He slid the towel under the bottom rail with a broom handle, stopping well outside striking range. The blue stripe lay visible against the straw. The Bobcat rose immediately. Not in panic. In protest. Her shoulders lifted. Her short tail twitched once. She stepped forward, kepite hat, that careful limp, placing each paw as if the straw might betray her. Then she struck the towel so quickly Eli flinched against a shelf and knocked over an empty coffee can. The can rolled in a loud circle. Everyone froze. The Bobcat froze too, one paw planted on the towel, eyes wide, ears flat, body ready to turn sound into escape. Ron caught the can with his boot. "Sorry," he mouthed. Caleb did not move. The cold from the concrete floor crept through his boots. After a long moment, she looked down as if realizing her pave cap still pressed the blue-striped cloth. She lifted it, sniffed the towel, then batted it again with less force. Mara's mouth softened. "She is testing whether it fights back," she whispered. The Bobcat hooked one claw into the hem and dragged the towel 2 inches closer to her corner. Then she seemed to regret having shown interest. She turned away, sat down, and began washing one paw with short, irritated strokes, as though the entire matter had been beneath her dignity. Eli's shoulders shook silently. Ron pressed a fist over his smile. Caleb looked at the towel now wrinkled in the straw and felt something in him loosen. Anna would have loved that. Not because it was cute, though it was, in its severe wildcat way. She would have loved the honesty of it. Fear had not disappeared. The bobcat had not become grateful. She had only discovered that the soft blue thing did not chase, bite, shout, or demand. It simply stayed where it was placed. Caleb had once thought healing should feel larger. A bell, a bright room, a hand squeezing back. After Anna, he had learned that some kinds of healing arrived, almost invisibly, like a wild paw resting for 1 second on a towel and not striking again. He stayed crouched until his legs ached. The bobcat finished washing, looked at him, and gave the towel one final pat. Not a strike, not play exactly, more like a decision filed away for later. Then she stepped around it, lowered her head to the fresh broth, and drank while Caleb remained on the other side of the tape. No one spoke. Steam rose from the bowl. Snow scraped softly against the shed wall. The bobcat drank in small, guarded laps, pausing often to listen, her torn ear twitching toward every breath. When she was finished, she did not retreat all the way into the corner. She stopped beside the blue-striped towel. Her paw rested on its edge, only for a moment. Then she curled her toes under and looked away. Caleb bowed his head, not to her like a pet, not to himself like a prayer, but to the small mercy of being allowed to witness a creature choose 1 inch less fear. The days after the blue towel became a rhythm no one at Bayfield Station admitted they were keeping. Morning began with the scrape of Caleb's boots across the packed path between the back door and the maintenance shed. He carried 2 bowls in an old wooden tray Ron had found in his plow shop, one for water and one for broth, or small pieces of thawed meat, Mara approved. The tray wobbled if Caleb moved too fast, so he learned to walk as if the whole world were sleeping. The shed always greeted him with the same layered smell. Straw warmed beneath the lamp, cold iron tools along the wall, damp wool, and that sharp wild scent that belonged to the bobcat alone. By the 3rd morning, Caleb could tell whether she had eaten before he looked. The air felt different when the bowl was empty, as if she had already made her decision and retreated into dignity. She had also made opinions. She disliked the green water bowl and knocked it over twice with the offended precision of a judge striking down a bad law. She preferred her food placed slightly left of the blue-striped towel, not on it, never touching it. If Caleb forgot, she stared until he corrected the mistake from beyond the tape line. Eli began calling the towel Her Majesty's rug. They named her only after Mara said it would help the crew speak clearly in notes, not because a name made her theirs. Caleb chose Ember after watching her eyes catch the heat lamp glow in the dark. Eli said it suited her because she looked warm but would burn anyone careless. Ron said it was better than Culvert Cat, which had been his private suggestion. Ember did not respond to the name, but she came to know sounds. The back door hinge, Caleb's slower step, Mara's truck tires crunching over the packed snow, Eli's habit of humming half a song and forgetting the rest, Ron's cough before he entered, polite as a doorbell. Whenever another firefighter tried to peek in too loudly, Ember slipped into the plywood shadow and became almost invisible, only her pale whisker showing through the dimness. Caleb respected that vanishing. He had seen people do it too. After house fires, after funerals, after doctors used quiet voices in bright rooms. Some souls did not want attention while they decided how much of themselves could remain. At midday, when calls were slow, Caleb sat on an overturned bucket outside the tape line and repaired equipment. He sharpened a shovel, mended a torn strap, sorted hose washers into a coffee tin. He did not read to Ember or sing to her. His presence became another steady object in the shed, like the workbench, the straw bale, the hanging rake. Sometimes she slept while he worked. Not fully, never fully. Her ears kept moving, even when her eyes closed to narrow amber slits. Once, a mouse scratched behind the wall, and Ember lifted her head so sharply the blue towel slid from under one paw. Her pupils widened, and for a moment the injured animal disappeared. In its place was a hunter built of stillness and winter light. Caleb stopped sorting washers. "There you are," he murmured. Ember's torn ear turned toward him. Her body did not. That was their way. A few afternoons brought gentle absurdities. Eli left his knitted cap too close to the fence while changing the water, and Ember hooked it through the bars with one claw, dragged it halfway under, then seemed disappointed that it was not alive. Ron tried to bribe her goodwill with a feather from the plow yard. She sniffed it, sneezed, and turned her back so decisively that Ron apologized to the feather. Mara, usually serious, stepped in one day with hay on her sleeve from another rescue, and Ember spent 10 full minutes staring at that sleeve as if it contained secrets. Caleb carried those moments with quiet care. They were not affection, not in the simple way people wanted affection to look. They were signs of life returning to its proper corners. Curiosity, irritation, preference, suspicion with room enough to breathe. At night, the station softened. The engine bay lights dimmed. The crew's boots dried upside down near the heater. Wind pressed snow against the windows and made the old building creak like a ship. Caleb sat at the kitchen table with Anna's chipped loon mug and the logbook Mara had asked him to keep. Ate at Saumui. Water changed. Left hind still guarded. Struck towel once, without claws. Listened to siren, did not panic. His handwriting looked plainer than the ache beneath it. Sometimes Eli joined him with a bowl of cereal eaten far too late for dignity. Ron dropped off biscuits in foil and claimed they were for department morale. Mara once found Eli wearing an extra towel as a scarf because the shed was cold, and Caleb told him he looked like a chimney with laundry. The laughter was never loud. Somehow, everyone knew the shed could hear them. One evening, Caleb went out for the final check and found Ember sitting closer to the front of the pen than before. Snow tapped against the shed wall, soft and patient. The heat lamp painted her spotted coat with dull red, and the torn edge of her ear made a small, uneven shadow behind her head. Her left hind leg still tucked carefully beneath her, but she no longer held herself like a creature braced for the next blow. Caleb set the bowl down 3 feet from the fence. Ember did not retreat. She looked past him toward the open shed door, where the path to the station glowed under a yellow porch light. Then she looked back at him and blinked once. Slowly. Not softness, not surrender, but less refusal than before. Caleb stayed crouched, hands empty. He had spent years thinking grief had made his life smaller. Work, station, house, cemetery road, repeat. Yet here was this wildcat, injured and suspicious, forcing every hour to widen around patience. She brought no comfort in the usual sense. She hissed at bowls. She stole hats. She despised green ceramic. But she had made the station listen. And in that listening, Caleb felt the old rooms of himself opening a little, not because the hurt had gone, but because another living creature had entered the winter and required him to be gentle in a way that did not ask him to forget. By the second week, the snow stopped feeling like a storm and began to feel like a wall around them. Bayfield Station sat in a white hush, its roof loaded heavy, its windows rimmed with frost, its engines waiting beneath fluorescent lights, while the world outside narrowed to plow roots, chimney smoke, and the black spruce beyond County Road 6. The lake was hidden past town, but on certain mornings Caleb could smell it anyway, a mineral cold under diesel and coffee. Ember healed in that hush. Not quickly, not sweetly. She did not become easy. She remained a bobcat, made of watchfulness and muscle, with the torn ear, the pale whisker, and the guarded limp that showed more when she was tired. Yet each day she occupied the shed more fully, as if she had stopped being trapped inside it and had begun treating it as a temporary claim. Mara brought a low wooden platform and fastened it in the pen so Ember could climb if she chose. At first, Ember ignored it with magnificent disdain. She walked past it 6 times, sniffed one leg, and sat with her back to it as if the platform had offended her bloodline. Eli took this personally. Moat built that very sturdily, he told Caleb. You nailed one board. Moat nailed it with respect. That evening, when no one was watching except Caleb from the bucket outside the tape line, Ember stepped onto the platform. She placed one paw, then another, waited for betrayal, and finally rose to the top. Her tail tip twitched. From that higher place, she looked down at the shed, the blue-striped towel, the bowls, the taped line, and Caleb himself. She had become queen of 6 square feet of plywood. Caleb lowered his eyes, because direct admiration felt rude. I want to tell him, he said. Ember's torn ear turned toward him. She began washing her chest with short, efficient strokes, pretending no conversation had occurred. The platform changed the room. From there, Ember could watch the high window where pale winter light entered around noon. She could study the rafters, the coat hook, and the mouse hole behind the shovel rack. When snow slid from the roof with a sudden thump, she no longer sprang into the corner. She crouched, listened, and decided the roof was foolish but survivable. That was how her joy showed itself. Not with bouncing or begging, but with the return of choices. She chose to stretch in the heat lamp until her spotted paws opened like small stars. She chose to drag the blue-striped towel onto the platform and knead it twice before remembering she was dignified. She chose to leave one neat paw print in dust near Caleb's tool chest, then avoided stepping there again. The crew began noticing without crowding her. Eli learned to enter humming the first 3 notes of the same old song. Ron brought a hand broom after seeing the scattered straw and labeled it Wildlife Supervisor. Mara once found Ember asleep with one paw resting over Eli's stolen cap and laughed softly. Caleb collected those moments like photographs, though he never lifted his phone. Some things lost truth when trapped too hard. And he remembered the first afternoon she chose his nearness. It happened without ceremony. Caleb had been sitting on the bucket, mending a torn strap from engine 2, the needle awkward in his big fingers. The shed was warm near the lamp and cold everywhere else. Outside, school children had been let out early, and their distant laughter drifted down the street like bells muffled in wool. Anna's old thimble sat beside him, though it was too small for his thumb. He kept it anyway, slipping it over his little finger when he needed to push the needle through thick fabric. It looked ridiculous there, silver and delicate on a Firefighter's hand. Eli had seen it once and wisely said nothing except, "Good tool." That day, Caleb pricked his finger and muttered under his breath. On the platform, Ember opened one eye. "Didn't ask for commentary," he told her quietly. She rose, stretched long, and climbed down. Each step held caution. Her left hind leg moved better now, though she still placed it after a brief thought. Caleb kept his gaze on the strap. He heard straw shift, heard the faint click of claws, heard his own breath slow. Ember came to the front of the pen. Not all the way, not close enough to touch. She stopped just behind the fence, beside the blue-striped towel she had dragged there earlier. Her nose lifted. She smelled leather, wool, old metal, a pinprick of blood, and Caleb. Then she settled down, facing sideways, close enough that her pale whisker nearly touched the wire. Caleb's throat tightened so suddenly he had to look at the needle until the shed steadied. She had not come to comfort him. That would have been a human story forced over a wild one. She had come because the sound, the smell, the slow hour, and the man beyond the fence had become familiar enough to investigate without fear winning. Still, to Caleb, it felt like being trusted with a candle in the dark. He finished the strap one stitch at a time. Ember stayed until the light began to fade. Once, when he shifted his boot, she opened Beote hot eyes but did not leave. Once, she yawned, showing small white teeth and a pink tongue, then seemed surprised by her own sleepiness. When Caleb finally stood, his knees cracked. Ember flicked her torn ear. "Same to you," he whispered. For the rest of that evening, the station felt different. The kitchen lights seemed warmer. Eli's cereal dinner seemed less terrible. Ron's biscuits were slightly burned, and nobody minded. Caleb washed Anna's chipped mug and set it by the window, where the last blue of evening touched the painted loon. Outside, Ember rested with one paw on the towel. Inside, Caleb let quiet joy arrive without asking it to explain itself. He had not known he could still feel that. Not happiness exactly. Nothing so bright or simple. It was gentler than happiness, more careful, like a small fire banked under ash. It did not erase Anna. It did not repair the years. It only warmed one corner of him that had been cold for a long time. And because Ember had chosen nothing more than to sit near him, Caleb understood that sometimes joy returned without knocking, on silent pause, and stayed only as long as it wished. The first warning came as a pattern Caleb almost missed. It was not a broken latch, not a scream from the shed, not the kind of sign that announced itself plainly to men used to sirens and flashing lights. It was only Ember, standing at Moat 5, the high window, after midnight, her body stretched tall against the platform, her torn ear tipped toward the tree line beyond the yard. The window showed almost nothing. Frost had thickened in the corners, and beyond the glass the firehouse porch light made the falling snow look like slow ash. The woodpile stood under its tarp near the back fence. Beyond that, the black spruce gathered so closely that the forest seemed to be listening. Ember listened back. Caleb had come in with fresh water and found her that way, still as carved stone, one paw lifted from the platform and forgotten in the air. The bowl in his hand steamed faintly. His glove smelled of metal and the orange he had peeled in the kitchen. Usually Ember noticed oranges with deep suspicion. That night she did not even turn. He set the bowl down. Her whiskers pushed forward. Then, very softly, she made a sound Caleb had never heard from her before. Not a growl, not a hiss. A low, throaty chuff that seemed to belong to distance. Caleb looked through the frosted pane. Nothing moved. Still, The hairs at the back of his neck lifted. By morning, there were tracks beside the woodpile. Mara found them first. She had come early with a clipboard tucked under her arm and snow on her lashes. Her boots stopped so suddenly Caleb nearly bumped into her. "Do not step there," she said. The prints crossed from the spruce line to the tarp, circled twice, and disappeared back into the trees. They were small, round, and delicate in the powder, with no claw marks showing. Bobcat tracks. Not Ember-S, unless Ember had learned to pass through latched doors and return without disturbing a straw. Eli leaned over Caleb F's shoulder, scarf wrapped up to his nose. Maybe she has a secret twin. Ron, arriving with a shovel, said, "Maybe she's hosting relatives and didn't tell us." Mara gave them both a tired look, but her mouth almost smiled. No one is hosting anything. Caleb crouched beside the tracks. The snow smelled clean and sharp, with wood smoke drifting from a nearby chimney. He could hear Ember moving inside the shed, paws clicking once against the platform, then straw rustling. She had heard them near the woodpile. She knew they had found what she already knew. "Male?" Caleb asked. "Hard to say from this," Mara said. "Could be another juvenile. Could be a female. Could be simply passing through." But her eyes stayed on the trees. That day Ember would not settle. She paced the length of the pen in a silent loop, platform to towel, towel to water, water to fence, fence to platform. Her left hind leg had grown stronger, but when she tired, she still carried it carefully, as if remembering pain before pain returned. She ignored her morning meal until it cooled. She pushed the green bowl, which had been retired and foolishly brought back by Eli, into the corner with one precise shove. "Mote accept responsibility," Eli whispered. "You should," Caleb said. Ember struck the bowl once more, as if endorsing the verdict. There were little warm moments even inside the unease. Ron tried to tape a handwritten sign, reading, "No visitors by order of Ember," to the shed door, and Mara made him add, "By order of Kankakee Wildlife Procol" underneath. Eli replaced the green bowl with a dented silver one and bowed when Ember sniffed it without contempt. Caleb found her sleeping at Mote noon, with the blue-striped towel partly over her own tail, as if she had accidentally tucked herself in and would deny it if questioned. But by late afternoon, the shed no longer felt like a shelter holding stillness. It felt like a room waiting for news. Ember kept returning to the window. Once she rose on her hind legs and placed both front paws against the wall beneath it, stretching her spotted body long. Caleb saw how much muscle had come back to her shoulders, how the hollow places had filled little by little. Pride stirred in him, followed quickly by the ache beneath it. Healing meant strength. Strength meant choice. Choice meant someday the latch would open for reasons other than feeding. He had known that from the beginning. Knowing did not make it painless. Mara watched him watching Ember and said nothing for a while. They stood outside the tape line as evening blue gathered in the shed corners. Ember's eyes shone faintly in the dimness. "She is hearing something," Mara said at last. "Another bobcat?" "Maybe." Caleb folded his arms, hands tucked under his elbows. "Would that be good?" "For the part of her that belongs out there, yes. And for the part still healing." Mara sighed through her nose. "That is what we watch." Caleb nodded. He had learned not to argue with truths that arrived wearing two faces. That night, he sat longer than usual in the kitchen. Anna's chipped mug rested near the logbook. Eli had drawn a tiny crown beside Ember's name in the margin, and Caleb had pretended to be annoyed while leaving it there. the station smelled of chili, coffee, wet socks, and the faint pine soap Ron used too generously in the bathroom. Outside, the forest pressed close. Caleb wrote slowly. Restless all day. Ignored first meal. Tracks outside woodpile. Vocalized toward trees. No panic, but alert. He stopped with the pen hovering. No panic, he had written. But that was not entirely true. Ember was not panicking. He was. Not loudly. Not visibly. Caleb Rowan had stood steady through burning roofs and black ice wrecks and hospital corridors where machines breathed for people he loved. He knew how to keep his face calm. But inside, he felt the old fear unfolding. Something was calling from beyond the safe circle of light. And one day soon, Ember might answer. The whiteout arrived without drama, which somehow made it worse. By supper, the sky had lowered until the station streetlights wore halos. Snow moved sideways past the kitchen windows, not falling so much as traveling vécépité had purpose. The engines sat ready in the bay, chains checked, fuel full, windshield wipers lifted like black fingers. Every firefighter knew the night would not stay quiet. Ember knew it too. She refused her evening meal. Caleb stood outside the tape line with the silver bowl and watched her sit on the platform, eyes fixed on the frosted window. The heat lamp painted her coat dull copper. Her torn ear kept turning toward the spruce, then toward the roof, then back to the spruce. Her whole body seemed made of listening. "Come on," Eli murmured from the doorway. "You argued for that bowl." Ember did not look at him. Ron had left a biscuit wrapped in foil on the shed shelf for Caleb, with a note that said "For human only, probably." Mara, who had come by after another call, read it and shook her head, but she slipped half the biscuit into her pocket for later. Even on that uneasy night, small kindnesses kept trying to live. Caleb placed the food in its usual spot, 3 feet from the fence, slightly left of the blue-striped towel, not touching. Ember's nose twitched once. Then she gave a soft chuff toward the window, the same sound that had first tightened the air. Mara's expression changed. "She is not calling us," she said. Caleb looked at her. Mara did not soften the truth. "She is calling out." Wind shoved hard against the shed, and snow hissed under the bottom of the door. Somewhere inside the station, the radio cracked alive. A rollover on Highway 13. Possible injury. Ice across both lanes. Caleb's shoulders lifted before he thought. Duty entered him the way breath did. Eli said, "Cap?" Caleb looked once at Ember. She remained on the platform, wild and still, as if her body had stayed in the shed while some invisible part of her had already gone into the trees. "Mara?" he asked. "Moat will stay until you return." He nodded, grateful in a way too quick for words. Then he went. The call swallowed 3 hours. Highway 13 had turned to glass. A pickup lay tilted in the ditch with its headlights buried in snow. No one was badly hurt, but every movement took time. Caleb helped an old man through the passenger side and wrapped him in a blanket, while Eli searched for a missing boot that had somehow landed in the back seat. Ron Harker arrived with the plow and muttered that clean-looking weather was always the meanest. Caleb laughed because the old man laughed first. But through the whole call, part of him stayed in the shed. He saw Ember's lifted paw, her fixed stare, the prints by the woodpile, the way healing had turned, almost overnight, into restlessness. When the truck finally pulled back into the station yard, the storm had thickened. The porch light showed nothing beyond a spinning wall of white. Caleb stepped down, boots sinking deep, and saw Mara standing at the shed door. She was not inside. She was outside, one hand gripping the latch. Caleb stopped. The world narrowed to that hand. Mara turned. Snow clung to her hood and lashes. Her face held no panic, and Caleb knew it was bad. "The latch iced," she said. "Moat checked it twice earlier. The wind must have worked the lower clip loose after ice built around the frame." Caleb crossed the yard. Inside the shed, the pen door hung open by 4 inches. 4 inches was not enough for most creatures. It was enough for a bobcat who had once survived a snow-choked culvert, who could flatten herself into shadow, who had spent 2 weeks measuring every seam of her temporary world. The platform stood empty. The blue-striped towel lay twisted beneath the fence, dragged toward the door. The silver bowl had tipped, food scattered across straw. Near the threshold, where wind had blown powder across the floor, there was one clear paw print. Small, round, perfect. Then nothing. Eli arrived behind Caleb and whispered a word he would have apologized for on any other night. Ron came with a flashlight and immediately lowered it, as if brightness might make the empty pen emptier. Caleb stepped to the tape line and stopped. Habit held him there for one absurd second. He had trained himself not to cross it, not to take what was not offered, not to make her fear worse by needing too much. But Ember was gone. The shed smelled suddenly larger. Straw, broth, cold oil, damp wood. All the familiar things remained, yet the room had lost its center. Mara crouched near the paw print. "She left on her own strength," she said quietly. "No drag marks. No struggle." That should have comforted him. It did, somewhere under the pain. Caleb walked to the open shed door. Snow struck his face in sharp little needles. The path to the station had already begun to vanish. Beyond the woodpile, the spruce trees were only darker places inside the white. He wanted to call her name. He did not. A name was for notes, bowls, and human tenderness. Out there, she was not Ember because he had chosen it. She was herself, and the storm had taken her into the language she understood better than his. Still, his throat worked around the silence. Eli picked up the blue-striped towel with both hands. She took it to the door. Caleb looked at the clawed cloth and felt a terrible tenderness move through him. Maybe she had dragged it while pacing. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant only that the towel had been in her way. Or maybe, for one brief moment before the wind and trees claimed her, she had carried a piece of the safe place as far as the threshold. Ron cleared his throat. "We can start looking." Mara nodded. Carefully. Lights low. No shouting. If she is close, we do not chase her into worse weather. Caleb understood. He also understood that knowledge did not keep the heart from stepping into the storm first. He took the flashlight Eli offered, turned its beam toward the snow, and walked past the woodpile into the white. Behind him, the shed door tapped softly in the wind, open and empty, like a question no one was ready to answer. The search began close to the shed, because Mara said frightened animals often circled before they vanished. Caleb wanted to run straight into the spruce, but he listened. He had learned over years of emergency work that panic loved a straight line, and wisdom often moved in widening circles. So he moved slowly with Mara, Eli, and Ron, their flashlights pointed low, the beams softened by snow until the whole yard glowed in broken pieces. The wind erased almost everything. A track appeared near the woodpile, then blurred beneath new powder. Another pressed lightly beside the fence, so delicate Caleb had to kneel to see it. Ember had passed there. She had stepped between two stacked logs, avoiding the open yard, choosing cover even while weak. She was not lost like a dropped thing. She was moving through her own world. Still, the storm was merciless. Snow crusted Caleb's eyebrows. It gathered in his collar and melted cold against his neck. The air smelled of pine pitch, diesel from Ron's idling plow, and the metallic bite of deep winter. Somewhere beyond the trees, a branch cracked beneath ice. Everyone stopped. Mara lifted one hand. No sound followed. Eli whispered, "Won't hate how quiet snow can be." Ron answered softly, "Makes a man hear his own bad ideas." Even Caleb, with fear sitting heavy in his chest, nearly smiled. Ron had brought coffee and forgotten the cups, so they passed the thermos lid around like a ceremonial object. Eli's borrowed scarf had frozen into a shape that made him look frightened permanently. Mara pretended not to notice when Caleb tucked an extra hand warmer into Eli's glove. They found a place beneath the low branches where Ember had paused. The snow there held a shallow oval, pressed by a body. A few strands of spotted fur clung to bark where she must have squeezed under the spruce skirt. Beside it lay one dark feather, likely from an old kill or a bird blown down by weather. "She rested here," Mara said. Caleb crouched until his knees sank into snow. The hollow was already filling. He imagined Ember tucked beneath the branches, torn ear listening, pale whisker trembling, body deciding whether to go back toward warmth or forward into whatever had called her. "She was tired," he said. "Yes." The word landed gently, which made it worse. They moved beyond the yard, where the station light faded behind them. The woods swallowed shape and distance. Flashlights caught only trunks, drifting snow, and needles glazed with ice. Caleb kept seeing amber eyes in every dark gap. Each time, the gap became nothing. He did not call her name. Mara had been clear. No chasing, no shouting, no making the forest larger and more frightening than it already was. If Ember was close, pressure could push her toward the road, the creek, or deeper cold. Care meant restraint. Love meant standing still when every human instinct begged to reach. That was the cruelest part for Caleb. He knew how to break doors. He knew how to climb ladders into smoke. He knew how to carry people who could not carry themselves. But Ember had given him no door to force, no ladder to raise, no weight to lift. She had given him absence, and absence could not be held properly. The old fear opened in him fully then. Anna in a hospital bed, too light beneath the blanket. Anna smiling because she was comforting him, even while leaving first. The chair across the kitchen table, the chipped loon mug, all the things he had kept, not because they brought her back, but because he could not bear another empty place without a witness. Ember had become a witness. That truth came to him in the dark, with snow hitting his face. A wild bobcat who hissed at moat fee bowls and stole caps had somehow stood beside the part of him he never discussed. She had needed nothing from his grief. She had not tried to fix it. She had only lived near it, fiercely, and made the station breathe differently. Now the shed was empty. Mara's flashlight stopped near a fallen cedar. "Caleb," she said. A line of tracks crossed the narrow opening ahead, clearer because the branches had sheltered them. Small round prints. No claw marks. The stride looked uneven. One hind print set a little shorter. Ember. They followed them for 20 yards. Then the tracks split the heart of the night. Another set joined from the left, smaller and close together, weaving around Ember's trail for several steps before the snow swallowed both beneath open sky. Caleb stared until his eyes burned. "What does that mean?" Eli asked. Mara stayed quiet long enough that the wind answered first. "It means she was not alone for at moat fee least a little while." Caleb looked into the trees. The thought should have comforted him, and it did in a hard, distant way. Something of her kind had found her, or she had found it. The call from the window had not been imagination, but the human part of him, the part still learning that care was not ownership, felt the words like a door closing. Ron shifted beside him. "Could be good. Cap." Caleb nodded. He could not speak. They searched until the storm made searching careless. Mara finally stopped them near the creek bed, where water moved black under shelves of ice. Ember's tracks had vanished beneath wind-scoured powder. To keep going would mean trampling sign, risking the crew, and perhaps driving her farther away if she watched from hiding. "We come back at first light," Mara said. Caleb looked toward the darkness beyond the creek. Every part of him resisted. Then he remembered the tape line in the shed, the distance that had made trust possible. The bowl placed 3 feet from the fence. The blue towel left where she could choose it or ignore it. Every good thing between them had begun with not taking more than she offered. He lowered the flashlight. "All right," he said. They walked back in silence. At the station, the shed door had been closed against the wind, but the empty pen waited inside. Straw scattered, platform bare, blue-striped towel folded by Eli on the workbench like something recovered from a shoreline. Caleb stood before it for a long time. Then he took Anna's chipped mug from the kitchen table, filled it with coffee he did not want, and sat by the window facing the woods until dawn paled the glass and showed him nothing moving. First light gave them nothing. The storm passed before noon, leaving the world polished, as if every hard edge had been wrapped in cloth. Snow lay high on the station roof and bowed the spruce branches toward the ground. The sky cleared to a pale, brittle blue that made Caleb's eyes ache when he stepped outside. They searched again. Mara moved ahead with the patience of someone reading a language written lightly. Eli followed with a pack of supplies and a face too young for the worry it carried. Ron brought his plow as far as the old logging turnoff, then walked with them, breath puffing through his gray beard. They found old tracks, half filled, a hollow under cedar roots, a place where something small had leapt across a drift and vanished into shadow. Once, Mara crouched near a narrow trail and touched 2 fingers to the snow. "Not fresh," she said. Caleb nodded. The woods smelled sharp and green beneath the cold. When wind shook the branches, powder fell in soft curtains. Somewhere a chickadee scolded them, as if they had parked wrong in the forest. Eli quietly apologized to the bird, and Ron told him not to start negotiating with woodland management. Even Mara smiled. Caleb tried to hold those little warm sounds. They kept the search from becoming only dread. By late afternoon, they had gone as far as the creek bend where the ice narrowed and the animal trails crossed. Ember's path, if it was hers at all anymore, had disappeared beneath the busy writing of squirrels, fox, deer, and wind. Mara stood with her hands on her hips and looked toward the deeper timber. "She may have gone beyond where we can help," she said. Caleb heard the care inside the words. May have. Not had. Mara knew mercy sometimes needed small openings. She was stronger, he said. She was. She knew the trees. Yes. He wanted those facts to become comfort if he stacked them carefully enough. Instead, they remained facts, cold and useful and not nearly large enough. They returned as the light began to drain from the sky. Bayfield Station looked almost tender from the road, its windows glowing amber against the snowbanks, its roofline softened, its flag snapping tiredly in the wind. The maintenance shed stood behind it. Ve Capite had its door repaired. The latch cleared the lower clip, replaced by one Ron claimed could hold back a moose with legal permission. Eli had swept the pen, though no one had asked him to. The blue-striped towel lay folded on the platform. The silver bowl had been washed and set upside down. Caleb noticed and said nothing, because his throat tightened around ordinary gratitude. He went inside, removed his gloves, and found Anna S. chipped loon mug waiting beside the coffee pot. Someone had filled it. Someone had also left a biscuit on a napkin and drawn a tiny crown in the corner. "Department morale," Ron said gruffly from the table. Caleb sat, wrapped both hands around the mug, and looked toward the window. Dusk came early in winter, and it came that evening with a deep violet hush. The station kitchen grew quieter. Boots dried by the heater. The radio murmured once, then slept. Eli nodded off in a chair with his scarf still on. Ron pretended to read yesterday's newspaper upside down. Caleb did not move. He had begun, slowly and painfully, to make room for the possibility that Ember would not return. The thought did not feel noble. It felt like standing beside another bed, another empty chair, another place where love had taught him to open his hands because closing them changed nothing. Then something struck the back door. Not hard. A dull scrape, followed by silence. Caleb lifted his head. Eli woke with a snort. Ron lowered the newspaper. No one spoke. The sound came again. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. Caleb stood so quickly the chair legs knocked the floor. He crossed the kitchen, down the short hall, and into the rear entry. Cold pressed through the doorframe. Snow had drifted against the threshold. He opened the door. At first he saw only evening and the path to the shed, blue in the fading light. Then Ember stepped from behind the woodpile. She was thinner than she had been 2 days before, her spotted coat crusted with snow along the shoulders, her torn ear ragged against the dim sky. Her pale whisker caught the porch light in a single bright line. She stood low, breathing fast, left hind leg held carefully, amber eyes fixed on Caleb with a fierce, urgent exhaustion. For one heartbeat, Caleb forgot how to be still. Then he remembered. He lowered his hands. He did not step toward her. "Ember," Eli whispered behind him, and the name broke like a match in the cold. The Bobcat's ears flicked. She did not flee. Instead, she opened her mouth and gave that low chuff, rougher now, pulled from some place deep in her chest. Then she turned away from the door and looked toward the spruce. Mara's truck lights swung into the yard just then, as if the evening itself had called her. She climbed out before the engine fully settled. "Caleb," she said softly. Mort see her. But he was not sure he understood what he saw. Ember took 3 steps toward the trees, stopped, and looked back. Not like a pet asking to be followed. Not like a trained animal obeying some storybook bond. She looked back like a wild creature, weighing whether humans were useful enough to risk one more time. Then she chuffed again. Caleb's eyes burned. Ron whispered. She came back for the bad bowl service. Eli made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. Mara raised one hand, asking everyone to remain calm, but her own face had changed. "She wants something," Mara said. Ember paced once near the woodpile, tail tip twitching, paws sinking into the fresh snow. She moved toward the spruce, then back toward Caleb, then toward the spruce again. Her body trembled, not only with cold, with urgency, with decision. Caleb stepped onto the porch, slowly, boots barely creaking. Ember watched him. He thought of the culvert, the towel, the taped line, the long nights of not reaching. Every good thing had begun when he let her choose. So he did. He followed at a distance, carrying no net, no blanket, no claim. Only a flashlight pointed low, and the hope that this time what returned from the dark had not come back alone. Ember led them to the creek bend. She did not walk in a straight line. No bobcat with sense would have crossed open snow that way, not with people behind her, and the evening turning blue between the trees. She slipped from shadow to shadow, pausing beneath low spruce branches, vanishing so completely at times that Caleb's heart kicked hard before her torn ear appeared again beyond a drift. Mara followed 20 paces back. Caleb stayed beside her. Flashlight lowered until the beam touched only snow near his boots. Eli and Ron remained farther behind at Mara's signal, carrying towels, a small carrier, and the kind of silence that felt like work. The forest after storm smelled clean enough to hurt. Spruce needles, cold water, old bark, and the faint musk of wild animals hidden everywhere and nowhere. Snow brushed Caleb's pant legs with a dry whisper. Above them, the branches held so much powder that every breeze sent a pale veil down over their shoulders. Ember stopped near the fallen cedar where they had found her resting place the night before. She looked back once. Then she disappeared beneath the root shelf. Mara held up a hand. Everyone froze. At first, Caleb heard only the creak under ice, a black and secret sound moving below the snow crust. Then came another sound, so thin he almost mistook it for a branch rubbing in the wind. A kitten's cry. Not loud, not steady. A small, raspy complaint from deep under the cedar roots. Eli made a broken little sound behind them. Ron took off his cap and held it against his chest, as if they had stepped into a church no one had built. Mara's face changed, but her voice stayed calm. No one moves quickly. Caleb could not move at all. Ember had not returned for warmth. She had not returned because she wanted the shed or the bowls or the strange human routines that had gathered around her. She had returned because somewhere in the storm, beneath this cedar, there had been lives smaller than fear. Mara crouched low, turned her head, and listened. "There are at least two," she whispered. Ember emerged again, shoulders dusted with snow, eyes burning in the dusk. She stood between the people and the roots, trembling with exhaustion and warning. Her mouth opened, showing teeth. She did not trust them. Not fully. Not with this. Caleb understood that the trust she offered was not permission to touch. It was permission to know. Mara set the small carrier on the snow and backed away from it. "We give her options." They waited. The cold crept through Caleb's boots. Eli's scarf had sagged until only his eyes showed above it, wide and wet. Ron, who normally filled worry with talk, remained perfectly quiet except for one sniffle he blamed on the weather with no conviction. Ember turned toward the roots. A kitten cried again. She vanished under the cedar and came back dragging herself carefully, slow with pain and effort. In her mouth, held by the scruff, hung a tiny spotted kitten, limp with cold but alive. Ember placed it beneath the edge of the root shelf, not near the carrier. Then she stood over it, sides moving fast. Mara whispered, "Good mother." The words were barely sound. Caleb's throat tightened. He thought of Anna S., hands around shoebox nests, of the blue blanket, of all the fragile things his wife had carried through the world without demanding that they stay. He thought of Ember trapped in the culvert, thinned and freezing, while somewhere beyond the road, two kittens had waded through snow and hunger. She had been trying to go back. That truth struck him so quietly he almost bent under it. Mara worked with the patience of falling snow. She slid a warmed towel across the ground with a branch, stopping several feet from Ember. The bobcat hissed, then sniffed. Her torn ear flicked toward the kitten. She did not attack. After a long minute, she picked up the kitten again and carried it into the towel's warmth. Then she went back. The second kitten took longer. Eli shifted once, and Ember's head snapped toward him from beneath the roots. He froze mid-breath, one boot lifted in the snow like a guilty heron. Ron reached out slowly and steadied him by the elbow. The absurdity of it, Eli balanced there, with all the seriousness of a man defusing a bomb, would have made Caleb smile on any other night. Even Mara's mouth twitched. When Ember came out with the second kitten, Caleb saw Hadove Kephard. Her body shook. She placed the tiny shape beside the first. This one stirred, mouth opening soundlessly, one miniature paw pressing against the towel. No one reached. Mara looked at Caleb. "We cannot take them from her unless they are failing. We can support her. Warmth, food, shelter. Her choice, as much as possible." Caleb nodded, though tears had blurred the snow, and he had to blink them back before they froze on his lashes. They made a trail of help instead of a rescue. A warmed towel laid near the roots. A shallow dish of food set well away from the kittens. The carrier opened and turned sideways, covered with the horse blanket Ron had brought days ago. Mara placed a heat pack beneath one layer of cloth, safe and gentle, then backed away. Ember watched all of it. She ate only after they retreated behind a screen of spruce. Even then she took 3 bites, lifted her head, checked the people, checked the kittens, took 3 more. Her wildness remained intact, fierce as a locked gate. But when the kittens began to fuss, she stepped into the open carrier. Not because they asked. Because the warmest corner was there, and because her babies needed it. Caleb did not let himself breathe loudly until Mara closed the carrier door halfway. Not latched, just sheltered. Ember's amber eyes shone from within. Her body curved around the 2 tiny lives. Her pale whisker rested against one kitteness back. Ron whispered, "Well, what look lunk, B?" Eli wiped his nose on his glove and pretended he had not. Mara nodded toward the station. Slowly. "We bring the shelter around her, not the other way around." So they did. And Caleb walked back through the darkening woods, with tears finally slipping free, not from sadness alone, but from the unbearable mercy of understanding what Ember had trusted him to see. The maintenance shed became quieter than any room in Bayfield Station had ever been. The engines still rolled when calls came. Boots still crossed the bay floor. Radios still cracked alive. Vekepite hot road ice, chimney smoke, and stuck cars. But behind the station, beyond the repaired latch and the path packed by Caleb's boots, everyone moved as if winter itself had put a finger to its lips. Mara had helped set the carrier inside the old recovery pen, without forcing Ember out. The door stayed open, covered partly by Ron's horse blanket, with straw banked around it, and the heat lamp angled away so the mother could choose warmth without glare. Food and water waited in their old places. The blue-striped towel lay near the platform, because Ember had dragged it there herself. Inside the carrier, the kittens made tiny rustling sounds. Caleb heard them before he saw them. Small squeaks, soft scrapes, the faint hungry murmur of life hidden under a spotted curve of fur. Ember Kaipete herself between them and every human eye. When Caleb entered with the morning tray, she lifted her head from the dark, torn ear ragged against the blanket and gave him a low warning that meant he was noticed, tolerated, and not invited. He stopped at the tape line. "Fair," he whispered. The first kitten showed itself on the 4th morning, not by bravery but by accident. A round head bobbed from beneath Ember's front leg, eyes still cloudy blue, ears folded small, one paw resting on its mother's spotted chest. It opened its mouth in a silent complaint, and then disappeared when Ember tucked it back with a firm sweep of her chin. Eli, watching from the doorway, pressed both hands over his mouth. Ron whispered, "That one already filed a grievance." Mara wrote in her notebook without looking up. "Healthy objection noted." Caleb looked down until his smile could pass, without making the room too bright. They named the kittens only for the log. Mara insisted on that. Names helped track feeding and behavior from a distance. Names did not make wild lives belong to human hands. The bolder one, the accidental explorer, became Ash because of the smoky streak along its nose. The smaller one, who stayed buried against Ember and answered the world with one fierce squeak at a time, became Sable. Ember knew none of this and would not have cared. Her world had narrowed to milk, warmth, threat, and the restless bodies against her belly, she cleaned them with short, practical strokes. She shifted them deeper into shadow whenever voices lingered. If Ash crawled too near the carrier door, Ember hooked the kitten gently kepite, hat one paw, and pulled it back as neatly as Caleb might pull a hose from under a tire. That movement undid him a little. He had spent the weeks before thinking of Ember as survival sharpened into fur. Now survival had become tenderness without losing its teeth. She could hiss at Mara and clean Sable's ear in the same breath. She could flatten herself like danger, then curl into a wall of heat around 2 trembling lives. Seeing it there, in the shed that smelled of straw, broth, old oil, and snowmelt, made the fact feel sacred and ordinary at once. Anna would have watched without speaking, he thought. The thought no longer struck like a door closing. It moved through him like a hand passing over a quilt. Care became a set of small, careful rituals. Caleb brought food and stepped back. Mara checked from the side. Eli changed the water only after humming his 3 unfinished notes, so Ember knew which harmless fool approached. Ron repaired the shed's broken lower step and claimed it was for firefighter safety, though everyone saw him sand the edge smooth, where Caleb knelt most often. There were soft absurdities, because life insisted on them. Ash sneezed so hard once that it tipped backward into Sable, and Sable squeaked with great moral injury. Ember ignored the drama until both kittens climbed over her paw at once, then pinned them gently with her chin like a tired mother ending a meeting. Eli brought in a pencil to update the feeding chart, and Ember stole it through the fence with one lightning paw, keeping it under her chest while the grown men negotiated. Ron left a sign outside the shed, reading "Quiet babies do important Willcat work," and Mara, after a long stare, allowed it to remain. By the end of the second week, Ash and Sable began to tumble near the carrier entrance. Not play like house kittens in a sunbeam. Their movements were clumsy versions of old instincts. Ash pounced on straw shadows. Sable crouched behind the blue-striped towel and launched at a wrinkle as if bringing down a deer. Their short tails twitched with concentration. Their paws were too large for their bodies, and when they tried to stalk, they wobbled like thoughts, still learning legs. Ember watched everything. If either kitten moved too far, she made a soft churring sound from her throat, and both froze. Ash usually obeyed after considering rebellion. Sable obeyed immediately, then seemed offended by its own caution. Ember's torn ear turned toward every roof creak, every truck door, every distant siren. Motherhood had not made her tame. It had made her more exact. Caleb loved them from outside the line. That was the only honest way to say it, though he never said it aloud. He loved the smoke mark on Ash's nose. He loved Sable's furious little squeak. He loved Ember's stern patience and the way she placed one paw over the blue towel while nursing, as if holding down the single soft object she had chosen from the human world. But love, he reminded himself, had to be useful to them, not hungry for him. So he kept distance. He fixed the latch. He warmed the bowls. He lowered his voice. He let Mara make the hard decisions. He watched the 3 shadows by the pines, through the high shed window, when Ember finally allowed the kittens to glimpse snow from the protected run. Ash sniffed the cold air and sneezed. Sable hid behind Ember's leg. Ember stood between them and the white world, amber eyes bright, pale whisker shining, every inch of her ready to leave and ready to guard. For the first time in years, the station did not feel like a place where he was waiting for loss. It felt like a place where something had been trusted to grow. Spring did not arrive in Bayfield all at once. It came first as a change in sound. Snow on the shed roof dripped into the gutter. The road softened from white to gray, then brown at the edges, where sand and old leaves appeared like things remembered. Meltwater ran beneath County Road 6, whispering through the culvert, where Caleb had first seen amber eyes in the dark. Ember noticed before the people did. She stood in the protected run with her nose lifted, drawing the season into herself. Her torn ear tilted toward the spruce. Her body had filled out again, lean and strong beneath the spotted coat. The limp in her left hind leg appeared only when she was tired. Ash and Sable tumbled behind her, larger now, no longer little bundles of squeaks and paws, but young wildcats with 2 mo-oo-she hat leg and not enough judgment. Ash pounced on a pine cone and rolled sideways into the fence, then sat up pretending the attack had gone exactly as planned. Sable stole a strip of orange flagging tape Mara had tied to a branch and dragged it under the platform with the purpose of a hunter bringing down bright prey. He watched from outside the tape line and whispered, "They are absolutely ready for life." Ron answered, "Life may file a complaint." Even Mara smiled, though her eyes stayed careful. The soft release began when the night stopped biting so hard. Mara opened a passage from the shed run into a larger wooded enclosure at the edge of the spruce, with brush cover and a shelter box that faced away from the station. Food appeared there at mote dusk and never by hand. Human voices grew rarer. The crew stepped back inch by inch until care became almost invisible. Caleb found that harder than he expected. He had known the goal from the start. Ember and her kittens were not meant to grow old behind a firehouse. They needed trees, mice under leaves, silent paths, danger they understood, and the dignity of belonging to no one. Still, each step toward freedom felt like a small emptying of the shed. The blue-striped towel remained in the corner for a while. One morning, Caleb found it outside the shelter box, damp with mist and marked by muddy paw prints. Ember had placed one paw on it, then left it behind. Caleb folded it once and set it on the shed shelf beside Anna's old thimble, not as a shrine, but as a record of something that had passed through and mattered. By late April, the first gate opened. No one made a ceremony of it. Mara checked the perimeter, unlatched the outer panel, and backed away. Caleb stood near the station wall with Eli and Ron. The evening held the damp chill of spring. Frogs clicked faintly in the low ditch. A crow called from the water tower, as if giving rude instructions. Ember approached the opening first. She did not rush. She stood with one front paw lifted, whiskers forward, torn ear twitching. Beyond the gate, the forest floor showed patches of dark earth between shrinking snow. The spruce shadows waited, deep and familiar. Ash tried to push past her. Ember turned and placed one paw on his shoulder. Not hard, not angry, simply final. Ash sat down at once, blinking as if he had chosen obedience for philosophical reasons. Ron's shoulders shook. Sable peered around Ember's hind leg and retreated when a chickadee made the terrible mistake of speaking. Then Ember stepped through. 2 paces. 5. 10. At the tree line, she stopped and looked back. Caleb did not raise a hand. He did not say her name. He let the moment stand without asking it to become more. Ember's amber eyes rested on the station, the shed, Quietus, the humans near the wall, and perhaps on the life that had held her only long enough to let her leave. Then she vanished into the spruce. Ash and Sable followed in uneven bursts, one bold, one cautious, both swallowed quickly by shadow. Eli wiped his face with the heel of his hand. "Allergies," he said. "Terrible season for them," Ron replied, though his own eyes were wet. Mara exhaled slowly. "Good release." Caleb nodded, because that was all he could trust himself to do. The woods did not give them back that night, nor the next. For 3 days, the station carried a different silence. Caleb still walked to the shed each morning out of habit, then remembered at the door. The pen stood open, platform empty, high window bright with spring light. He oiled the latch twice. He drank coffee from Anna's chipped mug and listened to meltwater run under the road. On the 4th evening, Just after the engines returned from a chimney call, Ember appeared near the woodpile. No drama. No cry. Only a shape in the dusk, low and still, torn ear visible against the last snowbank. Ash and Sable moved behind her like two drifting shadows. Ember did not come closer than the pines. She sat, wrapped her tail around her paws, and looked at Caleb through the blue evening. Caleb stood on the back step. "Hey," Eli breathed from behind him. Ember blinked once. Then Ash lunged at a dead leaf, missed, and startled himself so badly that Sable leapt straight upward. Ron made a strangled noise, trying not to laugh. Ember gave both kittens a look of et ouge hot, exhausted motherhood that Caleb felt warmth spread through him. They stayed 5 minutes. Then Ember rose and led them away. After that, her visits became part of the stationist's quiet life, not predictable, never owned. Sometimes a week passed with no sign. Sometimes Caleb found tracks at Moaf Dawn near the culvert, one larger set and 2 smaller ones pressed into mud. Once, Ember sat beyond the fence while Caleb fixed the lower step. Once, Ash left a pine cone on the path, though Mara insisted it was not a gift and Eli insisted it absolutely was. Caleb accepted both truths. He learned to love the glimpses without leaning toward them. He learned that settled did not always mean staying. Sometimes it meant knowing where safety had been and choosing the wild anyway. By May, the spruce had taken them almost completely. And still, on certain evenings, when the station lights warmed the yard and the culvert whispered under the road, Caleb felt watched from the tree line by eyes that remembered firelight, distance, and the man who had finally learned how to let a wild thing go. Years later, Caleb still drove slower at Harker's Bend. County Road 6 had been repaved. By then its shoulders widened, its culvert cleared and fitted with a safer apron. After Mara had written 3 firm letters, and Ron had added 1 less firm letter that included a drawing of an angry Bobcat in a firefighter helmet. The county workers had laughed, but they had fixed it before the next winter, and Ron claimed diplomacy had many forms. Bayfield Station changed in the small ways old places did. Eli Garreau-Yves kept into his shoulders and stopped looking surprised when people trusted him. Ron retired from full plow duty and continued appearing with biscuits under the legal defense that nobody had told him to stop. Mara's braids silvered at the temples. Caleb's beard went gray first at the chin, then everywhere else as if winter had decided to stay. Anna's chipped loon mug remained at the kitchen table. The blue-striped towel, faded nearly pale from years of washing, stayed folded on the shed shelf beside the old thimble. Caleb did not touch it often. He did not need to. Some objects held a room simply by remaining. Ember became less seen and more known. There were tracks after snowfalls, a quick shape crossing the logging road at dawn. Once, a game camera caught her near the creek, older and heavier, through the shoulders, torn ear unmistakable, pale whiskers still bright as a thread of frost. Ash had grown bold and wide-faced. Sable stayed smaller and slipped through shadows with her mother's caution. Sometimes one of them left prints near the woodpile, and Eli would announce that the night shift had been inspected. Caleb never answered too eagerly. He had learned restraint until it became tenderness. Then came the March evening, when the new recruits were polishing the engine bay, and wet snow fell in heavy flakes that stuck to the windows like torn paper. Caleb was 53 and had been sorting old hose couplings at the kitchen table, using Anna's thimble to push a stubborn bit of leather back into place. The radio was quiet. Ron was telling Eli that retirement had improved his supervision skills. Eli was pretending to disagree. A sound came from the back door. not scratching. A soft thump. Every conversation stopped. Caleb looked up before anyone said his name. He crossed the hall slowly. Age had not made him weak, but it had taught him that important moments deserved unhurried feet. When he opened the door, cold air moved in with the smell of pine, snow melt, and distant lake water. Ember stood at the edge of the porch light. Older, scarred lightly along one shoulder, fur thick with winter, torn ear lifted, amber eyes steady. She held no kitten in her mouth this time, asked for no rescue, carried no urgency except the ancient one that belonged to wild things deciding whether to be seen. Behind her, partly hidden in the spruce shadows, stood a young bobcat Caleb had never seen before. Nearly grown, long-legged, with a narrow face and one pale spot above the right eye. It watched the station with the severe attention of its bloodline. Ron whispered, "Grand Cat." Mara, who had arrived to drop off paperwork and had followed Caleb down the hall, murmured, "Do not make that an official term." Eli laughed once, very softly, and wiped his mouth with his sleeve. Ember did not come closer. She sat in the snow beyond the broken porch step Ron had repaired long ago, wrapped her tail around her paws, and looked at Caleb. He lowered himself onto the step. The cold came through his pants. Snow landed on his sleeves. His knees ached in the familiar way of men who had knelt too often on frozen ground and beside frightened lives. He placed his hands open on his thighs. For a while, no one moved. The young bobcat behind Ember lifted one paw and set it down again, testing scent and silence. Ember turned her head slightly, not looking away from Caleb entirely, but enough to give the youngster room to decide. The little one sniffed a pine twig, sneezed once, and retreated with great offense. Ron covered his face. Eli's shoulders shook. Even Caleb smiled. Then Ember did something she had not done since the night of the kittens. She chuffed. Low, rough, almost lost beneath the snow. The sound passed through Caleb like a hand laid gently over an old wound. He remembered the culvert, the ice shelf, the amber eyes refusing to surrender. He remembered the towel under her paw, the first empty bowl, the long search, the cedar roots, the tiny cries beneath the storm. He remembered believing every leaving meant love had failed to hold on tightly enough. Ember had taught him otherwise. She had left because she was meant to. She had returned because memory, in wild creatures and wounded men, did not always work the way people expected. It did not cage. It did not own. Sometimes it only marked a path through snow, back toward a place where fear had once been given room to breathe. Caleb's eyes filled before he could stop them. He did not sob. He did not reach for her. He simply sat on the step while the tears warmed his face for one brief second before the cold touched them. Mara stood behind him without speaking. Eli bowed his head. Ron took off his cap, as he had done once at the creek bend, and held it against his chest. Ember watched Caleb cry with the calm seriousness of a creature who had seen storms, hunger, birth, and spring. Then she blinked once, slow and clear. After a few moments, she rose. The young bobcat vanished first, slipping backward into the spruce. Ember followed more slowly. At the tree line, she stopped and looked back toward the firehouse. the porch light, the man on the step, and the road where water now moved safely beneath the snow. Then she turned into the woods. Caleb stayed there until the shadows closed. When he finally stood, Eli handed him Anna's chipped mug filled with coffee, and Ron said the department would deny any emotional misconduct. Mara reached past Caleb and fixed the door latch with one practiced tug. Inside, the station returned to its ordinary sounds. But Caleb carried that chuff with him for the rest of his life, not as proof that Ember had belonged to him, but as proof that kindness could travel farther than anyone saw, through culverts, storms, forests, and years, until one snowy evening it came back, just close enough to be remembered. The snow kept falling after Ember disappeared, softening the prints at the edge of the porch, until they looked less like tracks, and more like a thought the earth was slowly keeping for itself. Inside Bayfield Station, the engines waited under dim lights. Anna's chipped loon mug cooled on the table. The blue-striped towel rested in the shed, folded beside the old thimble, carrying no magic except the kind people give to things that were present when a heart began to open again. Caleb did not see Ember every winter after that. Some years gave only one track near the culvert. Some years gave nothing at all. But he no longer counted absence as emptiness. He had learned that wild love did not always stand in the doorway. Sometimes it crossed the tree line before dawn. Sometimes it raised its young far from human hands. Sometimes it returned only once, in snowlight, to remind a grieving man that what was given gently was never wasted. And if you are still here, listening at the edge of this quiet firehouse memory, thank you for staying with Caleb, with Ember, with Ash and Sable, and with all the small, trembling lives that pass through human hands for only a little while. May you remember an animal that once changed the weather inside you. May you be gentle with the ones who could not stay. And tonight, as the road grows quiet and the culvert carries meltwater under the snow, may you rest with the image of amber eyes at the edge of the pines, watching once, blinking slowly, and slipping back into the dark where she belonged. End of story. Sleep gently, friends.